Welcome to today's episode of Engineering Legends. I'm Kelly Rogers and I'm here today with Tiffany Long. Today's episode focuses on dowsing, which is also commonly referred to as water witching. So dowsing is the process of locating underground water and also other things like oil, for example, using a rod, a stick, or an object hung from a string and tapping into energy. The practice involves walking the surface of a property while holding the dowsing tool, with the tool reacting to the energy that underground water generates. And this is done under the guidance of an experienced dowser. The tools are called things like dowsing rods, sticks, divining rods, and pendulums.
We both came into the kitchen and I reached up and I turned on that faucet and there was water just flowing out like there had never been an issue before. And it was crystal clear and cold, and I have never had an issue since.
The practice has been popular for centuries, with some companies hiring dowsers to locate water and oil, and with individuals who need help in determining where to dig a well. According to the American Society of Dowsers, divining the location of water dates back many millennia. In the Tassili Caves of northern Africa, a cave painting depicts a man holding a forked stick, apparently using it to search for water. Other historical images that appear to represent dowsing are found in the temples of Egyptian pharaohs and in ancient Chinese etchings.
Yeah, I know in the past too, they used like willow rods, like willow sticks. I know the way I became interested in water witching and understanding how it works was I watched a TV show called Off the Grid. And on this show, they focus on people who want to build a residence that's completely self-sufficient. And so they use solar panels and wind turbines for energy and composting toilets. But the most important need, of course, for any home is water. And many of the off-the-grid houses are in the woods or off the beaten path. So usually, unless they're really close to a stream or river, they need to find a well. And on several episodes, they contacted a dowser to come out and help locate a water source.
Yep, I love that show too. Today we have with us a member of the Mile High Dowsers, Jack Roberts. The Mile High Dowsers are a nonprofit organization founded in 1981 and based in Lakewood, Colorado. Their purpose is to provide education, training, and fellowship to all in the art of dowsing, both to benefit the environment and for personal enjoyment. Jack Roberts has been dowsing for many years and serves as the current president of the Mile High Dowsers. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little background about yourself? How did you get into dowsing?
I was first exposed to dowsing when I was in high school. It was when my parents needed to have a well on their property. And they contacted a neighbor who was a well-known dowser in the area. And she came over and she used a tool called the bobber, which when you're using it, you start off and it's like this. And you're walking around and you're having your intentions of what you want to find. And pretty soon if there's water available, it'll start bouncing this way up and down. So that's how they located the initial well for the property. And then, so that piqued my interest. And so I've carried that through the rest of my life. In one of my first jobs, one of my supervisors showed us how to locate an underground water line. And I never knew how to do that other than going out with a shovel and starting digging and thinking, well, it's approximately right here. Well, he came and he had some brass rods. These happened to be from a clothes hanger that we just cut and made into L rods. But he used these. He could walk down the sidewalk or along the road or out in the field and go along. And when he'd come to a water line, they would close for him, indicating that below us was a water line. And so I thought that was real cool as well. And so I started using that and eventually figured out that we could use that to find other underground utilities as well, such as phone lines, power lines, gas lines, wastewater lines. So that worked out real well in my career to use those types of things.
Describe how it works. I mean, how does it work? How does it happen? I mean, do they vibrate or do you feel something?
Everything is made of energy, whether it's yourself, myself, a tree, your dogs, the cat, the grasses, the trees, all have energy. And there's frequency, there's vibrations. And so our bodies allow us to sense that vibration from all these other things. And until you start nurturing that, you're not realizing that you're able to sense those things. With these tools, it's like an antenna, or it enhances that vibration, so it's easy to see. So as I'm going along and I see these and they're kind of wiggling a little bit, and then I get to a water line or sewer line or gas line, and for me they'll cross this way. But when I'm in the search mode, they're out in the front and just kind of moving slightly. So it's just the sensing of energy.
And you just hold those loosely in your hands?
With these L rods, I hold it like this. You see how my thumb was down? If I hold it up on top, it's going to hold it too tight. I want it to be able to move.
And just to describe what he's doing, because people can't see it because it's a podcast, it looks like you're holding a metal rod that is in the shape of an L, and he's got his fist around the bottom half of that metal rod. And so it's like you're holding this rod that almost looks like a coat hanger, exactly like you said. So.
Yep, that's right. So it's just, I hold it loosely in my fingers so that it can spin around. It can do a 360-degree spin.
Now, when you say you have to kind of nurture or build that energy, how do you do that? I mean, is there do you have to practice? Is there a way you help kind of build that skill set?
There is. When I was first learning to douse, I still do it occasionally, is that when I get up in the morning, first thing I do is I drink a big glass of water, because it's important to stay hydrated. Since our bodies are made up of primarily water, you need to make sure that you are hydrated. And then I come down here into my office area, and I'll pull out my L rods, and I'll hold up just an individual one, and I'll say, "Please show me true north." And it'll swing over to show true north. And I'll say, "Okay, show me true south." And it swings around to the opposite side. Or I'll go to the east or the west. Then I'll say, so I'm asking questions that I know the answers to, so that it's proving that it is working for me. So then I'll say, "Okay, now show me where my computer is over on the desk." So it'll swing over. Yep, and there's my laptop. And then I'll say, "Okay, now show me where's my truck parked in the garage," and it swings around and it points out into the garage. So I do that, and so each day that I do that, the answer comes faster and faster and faster, and it's my intent as well that I gotta concentrate. If I'm not concentrating, I'm going to get an incorrect answer. But if I concentrate, I will have a correct answer.
So if you have someone that's like a new dowser or someone trying to learn the trade, are there exercises that you give them to practice?
Yes, the same things. I'll tell them that each day when they get up, first hydrate, then start doing that. Each person is an individual, so they need to determine what's the best time of the day for them to do the practice. But they need to practice every day initially to get good with these at dowsing.
So you've talked a little bit about the L rods. What are some of the other tools of the trade?
Well, we've talked about the bobber, we've talked about the L rod. The other one that is very common is Y rod, and most people know that people go out and get a willow stick. Well, a lot of people still do that, but many people will now use other materials that to create a Y rod. In my hand right now, I have bristles from a street sweeping machine that we put a small plastic nut on so that it makes a Y rod. So with the Y rod, I hold my hands out, palm up, and I'll put one each side of that Y rod under my thumb, and so it's pointing out in front of me. And then again, with my intentions, I'm going, okay, show me where that underground wastewater line is. So I'm walking ahead, and pretty soon it'll tip down to show me where that wastewater line is. So then I know that, okay, I can start digging there, or this is where I need to avoid when I'm out there with my excavator. So.
And for folks that are listening, what we can do is post some photos of some of those tools so you can see what they look like. So
yeah, that would be great.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's also the pendulum. Pendulums can be made of almost anything. Because I have a maintenance background, I made my own pendulum. And what I did is I took a washer and I polished it up and I ground on it, and I made it so that it's kind of in a diamond type shape, so that I have a point that's down, so that when I'm doing fine work, it can point exactly where I need it to. And then I have a little heavier chain than a lot of people use. A lot of people use a chain that is from like a necklace, so it's real lightweight. And I'm not saying that any of these aren't right, but this is what was right for me. So I took the washer, this heavier chain, and then at the top of my chain, which is about 5 inches long, I put a nut. And again, this represents my maintenance background. And with this, some people, they just pick up their pendulum and it immediately starts moving for them. And that's the long-time dowsers. I always kickstart mine because it's got that little heavier weight, and it'll start circling around, which we call a search mode. And then in my mind, I'm saying, all right, show me a positive response. And pretty soon, it starts going off, going like from my left shoulder out ahead of me, but off to the right-hand side. So it's moving in that direction. So that's telling me I got a positive response, or I got a yes answer. And I'll say, show me a negative response. And it goes to the opposite side. So it's going from like my right shoulder out in front of me off to the left-hand side. And so all of the questions that you ask with dowsing have to be able to answer it in a yes, no, or positive, negative. You can't just say, this is sky blue. Well, you can say that because it's going to tell you yes. But you have to be careful of the questions that you're answering.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. What is the most interesting? So I guess you can find water and you can also find other things as well. What's been the most interesting thing that you've dowsed or experienced that you've had in your many years of doing this?
Well, the most interesting, or what really, really intrigued me and really got me working to enhance my dowsing skills, was I hired a master dowser to come to my property in Montana that I had. I had 20 acres that I was planning to build on, and I needed a well. And I didn't think that I had the abilities to find a well at that time. So I had gone out there with my L rods thinking, well, if I can find all these other things, by gosh, should be able to find water. And sure enough, I went out there and I was dowsing around on my property and got up near my build site. Suddenly my L rods crossed and And I continued to walk, and they stayed crossed, and they stayed crossed for about 10 or 20 feet across. And what the heck is this? And so I was very confused. But I went ahead and used some con stakes and marked that. Then I contacted a master dowser and had him come to my property. And he used these Y rods, plastic Y rods, and we went up onto the property, and we found the vein of water, and he said, "Oh, this is a really good vein," and I pointed up the vein of water a ways and to the con stakes, and I said, "I did those with my owl rods, but I didn't know what it was." And he said, "Well, this is an underground stream or underground river flowing through here, that 10 or 20 feet wide." So that really got me. Well, before we even walked up onto the property, when I met him down at the highway, he gave me, I was in my truck, and he got in my truck with me, and he gave me one side of the Y rod, and he kept the other side in his hand. And as we were going up the road, this thing would dip down and say, "There's a vein of water, there's a vein of water." So the 3 miles off the road up to my property, it kept showing us wherever there were a vein of water crossing the road. And when we got up to my property, when we got to the leading edge of the property, it dipped down. He said, "Yep, there's a vein. Oh, and here's another good vein." And we parked the truck and got out, and he pulls out. He had like a carpenter's belt, and he had a variety of Y rods on that carpenter's belt. And he pulled off one, and on the end of it, above the nut, he had a little vial, and in that vial was sand. And he held that up in the air, and he just kind of swooped across my property with that. And he says, "Okay, there's that vein of water. No, that doesn't have. Yep, this vein over here, that's got sand in it." He says, "We probably won't end up there." So he puts that Y rod down, pulls up another Y rod with another vial on the end, and this time it has gravel in it. And he does the same thing, and he starts from that leading edge of the property and sweeps across. Says, "No gravel, and now it's just that sand over there." And it continues across to the other vein. He goes, "Oh, there's good gravel there." He says, "We're probably going to end up there." And sure enough, when we walked up the proposed roadway to the Bill site, we came to that really good vein of water. But again, before even walking away from the truck, we were still down there. He pulls out another Y rod with another vial on the end. This time he's got petroleum products in it. He holds that up. Nope, no petroleum products here. He lays that one down, gets another one out. And in this vial, he's got gold in it. No gold on this property. So you can douse for all kinds of things. So
that is absolutely fascinating. So who are your typical clients? Like, it sounds like you get a wide variety. Obviously, water is the one. Yeah.
Oh, it can be anybody. Engineering firms. I'm working with an engineering firm right now. I've got to go and douse a well site on Monday. This last year, one of my other good dowsing friends was contacted from overseas. There was a farmer in the desert, in a true desert. There's nothing but sand. He needed to find water for his farm. So he requested that the person give us some coordinates of the property, and also to send us some maps if he had any. And we were able to map douse. So with that's when we switched over to using our Pendulum, and we map doused, and we were able to find domes of water out on this in the desert. And then from those domes of water, there are veins that feed off of them. And so we wanted to be able to drill a well on a vein. You never want to drill into a dome of water, because you release the pressure and then the dome disappears.
Now, when you say you map Douse, are you not physically there? Are you doing it from a map, or how does that work?
Yeah, we're doing it from our offices or from our homes or from our vehicle, wherever we may be. If there's a map, a map of that specific area, and then we have to focus in there, be very intent on it. And then with our pendulum, asking specific questions, we can determine where the domes of water are, the veins of water are. We can still determine the depth down to that vein of water, what the yield will be back up at the surface.
So you can do it virtually.
Well, and I understand how the tools would point you to the location, but then how do they tell you the depth and the amount?
There's a couple ways here. You know, when we're out in the field and we're dowsing and we come to that vein, you know, we stand right on the center of it. You know, I always ask, show me the leading edge, show me the far edge, show me the center, so that I know that I'm truly in the center. And then I say, from the bottom of my feet to the top of the vein of fresh flowing potable water suitable for a well, how many feet is it? And then I'll start off, I'll go 5, 10, 20, 50, until, and, you know, using my pendulum where it's spinning around and into the positive until it gives me a no response. And then I start counting backwards down, you know, 9, 8, 7, 6, until I get a positive response again. So then I know that's what it is. And then I'll say, did I understand correctly that it is X number of feet from the bottom of my feet to the top of the vein of fresh flowing pot of water suitable for a well? And if I get a positive response again, I feel comfortable with it, and I'll notate that depth then. And same thing with on the yield to the surface, you know, from this point, you know, what will the yield be from that vein of water to this surface at this location?
So how accurate is the practice of dowsing?
Okay, now the depth and the yield is the hardest thing to get correctly. But again, the more practice you have at it, the more times you've gone out and done this, the more accurate you are going to become. So there was a well south of where I live now that I said that he was going to get about 15 gallons a minute at the surface, and it ended up that he got about 18 at the surface. So I felt very, very good. If I was that close, I felt very good.
Yeah, I would consider that pretty accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. As I was researching for this podcast, I saw there was a study done in Germany in the 1990s. It was a 10-year research period where researchers paired up experienced geologists and dowsers, sending them to dry regions of the world. And at the end of their research, they found that there was actually a 96% accuracy rate.
For the dowsers? That's amazing.
For the dowsers. Mm-hmm.
Now, do individual dowsers, like, do you track your own personal stats? Do each of you kind of track, like, how accurate you are?
I do. You know, as I'm any of my dowsing, I go ahead and I keep notes on it. And, you know, my forte, of course, is water. And so I've got a set group of questions of about 20 questions that I typically go through. And I, before I even go out and douse a well site, I always map douse first, because I don't want to waste my time or the person who needs a well's time. If there's no water there, I'll tell them up front, you know, that, you know what, if I were you, I wouldn't be spending your $20,000 or something to try and punch in a well.
You mentioned a minute ago that you recently worked with an engineering firm. How often do you work with because we're with an engineering firm, so I'm curious, how often do you work with engineering firms?
It's not real often, because a lot of them are skeptical of dowsing. They say that the science isn't there. But I always say is, come on with us. Come let us show you. You know, look at Look at, our record keeping that we have of the successes that we have. You can just use dowsing for so many different things. We were contacted, again, the same person that was contacted by a cemetery, and the cemetery had been in this location for, over 100 years, and they knew that there were some mass burial sites, but they had lost track of where they were at, and they asked us to come in there. And so my friend said, well, I know that it's approximately in this location is where they feel that the mass burial site is. And he says, let's see what you get. So I pull up my L rods, and I just hold up one and I say, okay, show me where the nearest underground mass burial site is. And it just turned around and went right over my shoulder. And we looked at each other and smiled and said, we've got to go see where this is. So we turned around and said, all right, show me where the leading edge of this mass burial site is. And so we took off walking, and we walked, about 150 feet. And suddenly they crossed. And I said, all right, show me where the far edge of this mass burial site is. So we went about 40 more feet. So we marked that. And then I turned and I said, all right, show me the end of it. So we found out that it was a rectangle site. And we ended up finding 5 mass burial sites. And what it was from the flu pandemic in the early 1900s, and from a flood, and from a train wreck. The train wrecked because of the flood. It washed out a trestle, but so a lot of people died from these 3 events, from the flooding, from the train wreck, and from the flu. And it was several hundred people that were buried in these mass burial sites. And we were able to tell whether it was adult male or female, or whether it was children, whether it was babies, whether it was young children. We can tell the sex of it. Another time, I was asked to come up to Steamboat Springs, Colorado. It's a big ski area and resort area, and there's some geysers there, or hot water thermal areas. And one of the places was wanting to do some upgrades to their facility, so they asked me to come up and identify the veins of thermal water flowing down to their pools. So we were able to pinpoint, I think it was 5 veins that were coming down off that slope, and determine the depth, determine the yield, determine the temperature, and towards the end of the day, I was just exhausted, and because you're focusing so hard on dowsing. But they said, well, up in this area, a dowser in the 70s told us that there's a mass burial site up here from a group of Native Americans that had been killed. And she said, and we've lost that information. Do you think that you could locate that? And I said, sure. So again, we were able to determine the area of this mass burial site. And then I was able to determine, how many women, how many children, how many men. And the owner of the property who was there when it was doused in the 70s, she had a big smile on her face, and she goes, it's almost exactly what we were told before as far as the number of women, children, and men that were.
So obviously you've been doing this
so when
for
you're doing something like
years. How long does it take for someone who's starting to try to do this to really kind of hone their skill set enough to where they're accurate? I mean, does it come pretty quickly, or can it take a good number of years?
I would, because I had been dowsing throughout my life, I think I got onto it fairly fast. But to get to the point where I was willing to go out and tell somebody, you need to drill a well here. It took me a long time to build up my confidence, because I did not want to be the one that had someone go out and drill this well. And and up here where I'm at, the wells are 500 to 900 feet deep. My particular one's 600 feet. So it would have cost around $20,000. And I sure didn't want someone to be drilling a dry hole. So it took me quite a while to build my confidence up. Before I became confident in my dowsing skills, or when I first got in with the Mile High dowsers, my well went dry. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? $20,000? I can't afford that. So I contacted one of my mentors, Greg Storzik, who is a well-known dowser. He's since has died, but so I called him up and said, Greg, my well went dry. What can I do? And he said, well, all right, I want you to send me a sketch of your property and where your house is, and let me know the direction that it's facing and where your well is. And so I went onto the computer and I crafted this up and I sent it off to him. And later that day, he called me and he says, okay, he says, I doused your property. You're right, there's no water there. And my heart just, sunk, and this, oh no. He says, but, he says, I found a dome of water about 1/4 mile away from your house. And there's a vein of water coming off of that dome that nobody has tapped into. And he says, I have asked for that dome of water, or for that vein of water, to redirect and come to your well. And he says, it should be there within 24 hours. And then my spirits just soared. And I said, oh, Greg, thank you, thank you, thank you. And so then we had the longest 24 hours of my life as we waited to see if that water would come. I had to convince my wife that let's not call a well driller, because she was ready to call a well driller. And she wasn't real keen on dowsing still. And so we waited that 24 hours, and I said, let's wait a couple more hours just to be sure. So even because we just couldn't stand it, we couldn't be here at the house. We went off to Denver, went to a movie so that we could be away from here. And then when we came home, we both came into the kitchen, and I reached up and I turned on that faucet, and there was water just flowing out like there had never been an issue before. And it was crystal clear and cold, and I have never had an issue since.
So when you say that he asked for the water to be redirected, who's he asking?
On that sketch, then he sketched in how he wanted that vein to come over to my well, and with his intentions, he was able to redirect. Now, this happens many times. Their wells will start producing less water or something, and for one reason or another, that vein of water has begun to move off. I don't know if it's magnetic pole and stuff or what it is, but a vein over time can redirect. And we were able, with our intentions, and sometimes even physically go out. Many people will use an iron rod, and they will get on that vein of water and they'll put in an iron rod. They'll go so many feet, put in another iron rod. So it's making an arc to get that vein of water going back, redirected to the well. I was working with a family in northern Colorado that had bought some property, and the previous owners had drilled a well, and it was a real low producer. It was less than a quarter of a gallon a minute that it would produce. And this family wanted to put in a new well. So I went up and I had found two veins of water on their property. And so I located a site on each of those veins where the absolute best spot on each vein was. And I said, but before you do that, let's do this, before you drill. And so again, with my intentions, I was on that vein of water, and then I was asking, please redirect this water over into this well. And I told them, I said, okay, give this some time. It's telling me that it'll be 48 hours before this vein of water comes over to your well. I said, you need to come back in before you call a well driller and pull the cap off your well and listen, see if you can actually hear the water entering into this well. And if nothing else, you lower a vial down in and measure the depth of the water so we can see if the water's coming in and how much storage you now have. So I have not heard back from them, but I fully expect that they have not had to drill.
Very cool. So if you're tapping into energy, do you feel it in your body then?
Yeah. Like for me, when I was preparing to douse early on, I raise my head up and I clear my thoughts, and I can feel the energy coming down through my body, through my neck. I feel it coming to my shoulders. I feel it coming down my arms, and I feel it come out to my fingertips, and the tips of my fingers will even start tingling. And then I'll feel it come down through my torso and then down each leg. Like right now, my legs are just tingling as I'm doing this, and then down to my feet, and then right out my toes. And then I know that I'm ready to douse. And in the beginning, it took me quite a while, a couple of minutes to do that process. But because I have been dowsing for so long, it's instantaneous for me now. But right now, my whole body is just humming.
Now, because we do work for an engineering firm and a lot of our listeners will probably be from our industry, how would you convince them to believe that this is real? Like, what can you say that, if you had a 60-second pitch to say this is real and you should believe this, what would you say?
Oh my goodness. That's a tough one, because there are a lot of folks out there that are, there's just no way that this is possible. And I just say, come on, come with me, come spend 5 minutes with me. And and the things that I can show you, we can go out and around any of your buildings, and we can go out and we can find the underground power lines, the phone lines, the sewer lines, the water lines.
So they could reach out to your group, the Mile High Dowsers, and you guys could show them how it works and give them a demonstration, or have them come on out and walk around with you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, this has been fascinating. I've learned a lot today, and it was a lot different than I actually thought, the way it works. So,
yes. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
You bet, guys. I enjoyed it. As you can tell, I love it. I love dowsing, and I love to talk about it.
We want to thank Jack Roberts for his time today. This discussion was very informative about the art and practice of dowsing. If you want to find more information on dowsing, visit milehighdowsers.org or the American Society of Dowsers at dowsing.org.
I bet many of our listeners out there have their own engineering legends. We'd love to hear from you. Please send us your feedback, stories, and ideas for future episodes. You can reach us at info@brwncald.com. This podcast was brought to you by Brown & Caldwell. It's our purpose and our passion to safeguard water, maintain infrastructure, and restore habitats to keep our communities thriving. Until next time.